ने कहा हिंदी भी बाकी हिंदुस्तानी ज़ुबानों में से एक है और उसे भी जगह मिलनी चाहिए, तो सिर्फ इसलिए कि मैं मदद कर सकूं बहुत सारे लोगों की, सिर्फ तर्जुमे में नहीं बल्कि जो बातचीत होगी उसमें भी मैं सिद्धार्थ वरदराजन से अनुरोध करता हूं कि वे बातचीत शुरू करें।
Thank you very much, Apurvanand. Thank you, Farah, for that introduction, and thank you, audience, for being here. This is really very inspiring to have this hall not only full, but with 99% of the faces that I've seen for the first time. In Delhi, it's normal to have the usual suspects at events like this. So it's really refreshing to have new faces, young faces. I believe that people have come from different campuses, and I think this is marvelous because today what I hope we will do is to engage Professor Sen in a discussion on, really a set of issues that are so central to what is happening in India and the world today, and which touch our lives and touch the polity in all sorts of ways. And I'm sure that there will be plenty of food for thought that you will hopefully take away and carry on engaging with when you are back in your respective campuses. The way that we will conduct this is that I will have dialogue with Professor Sen for around 45-50 minutes, and then open the floor for questions from the audience. And at that point, we would request you to be brief and to be pointed so that we can fit as many questions as possible. So without any further ado, let me launch in. This is an unscripted dialogue. Unlike certain other personalities who always want questions in advance, and they don't allow follow-up questions. We will have plenty of that over here, hopefully. Let me plunge straight in, because the broad themes of today are populism, neo-nationalism, citizenship, and it seems to me that we can take the discussion in multiple directions, but I want to start with the topic that's top of everybody's mind today, which is nationalism, danger of war. We've been through, since Kargil at least, one has been through cycles of highs and lows on the India-Pakistan front. Perhaps if you take a longer view, ups and downs, there have been periods of engagement, periods of war, but never have I seen, in at least my time as a journalist, the last 20 years, such a barren, fallow, dangerous period as we have right now, where it seems as if the possibility of engagement, even of the very limited kind that we had 3 or 4 years ago, seems completely impossible to imagine. And you actually have open discussion on either side today of the possibility of an India-Pakistan war. If that is not enough to alarm us, the manner in which discussion on war and nationalism is getting framed in the public sphere, both in Pakistan and India, is frightening, and I would say the role of the media is particularly alarming. But beyond the media, there is a sense in which the public sphere has gotten much more brittle, more intolerant, more quick to pounce on people who are considered deviants or who have views that are slightly away from the official view. The Pakistan military spokesperson's press conference today, he answered various questions, and when it ended, the journalists present all broke into cheers of Pakistan Zindabad at the end of a press conference. And things haven't reached quite that, we haven't seen that in press conferences here, but many of these anchors on television behave in that manner. And Professor Sen, I want to get your sense of this. This is very new for us in the sense that people are saying that we need to not just deal with Pakistan and the threat of outside enemy, but it's the enemy within that we have to deal with. And they use terms like parasite, dimak. Apurvanand and I were chatting before you came, and is there a resonance with what the atmosphere was in the country in '62, when again there was a lot of anxiety, insecurity related to war, or are we today passing through a period that is qualitatively new, different, and dangerous?
Oh, I have a microphone somewhere.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? It's amazing. Okay. Let me speak more loudly.
Yes.
Well, then you don't have a good microphone. Yeah. Okay, is that better now? Okay. Only thing is I can't have tea anymore. But before answering the question, let me just say 62, I was still teaching in Cambridge. And I came back and joined the Delhi School of Economics in 63. And on the way, I stopped in Pakistan, mainly because of some friends of mine, very close friends who had gone there. Arif Istikar was one of them. Mahbub Haq was another. Arif was in Lahore, and Mahbub in Karachi then. And I spent about, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. It was very difficult for me to sense there had been a war between the country to which I was going, namely India, and the country where I then was, namely Pakistan. So there is an element of lightness about it, which you ought to know. It isn't a problem similar to the hardened way, say, Israeli-Palestine situation has developed. There isn't that foundational difficulty in it. Now, of course, how come the Palestinian-Israeli situation has become what it is requires a different action, and if we have time, we can go to that. But there's a history to it which is not similar to ours. This is very important to recognize. They were making jokes. I remember Mahbub and some of the category of people were there in the Karachi airport as my plane was landing, and there was anti-Indian statement to the effect that one of them, Khalid Ikram, who is still around in Washington, told me as I landed, he said, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming only from Lahore. I thought you were coming from Delhi. And we were really scared. You're coming on an Indian airplane into an international fight. I was really scared about you." It's only later when I gathered you were only coming from Lahore in Pakistan International Airways. I was completely happy about the situation. So that's an anti-Indian statement, but it's not the kind that wars are made up of. And actually, even though the governments have done a lot to separate out the cricket teams and so on, the fact is that there's a scores of things where the Indian point of view would have got nowhere but for support from the Pakistani team. So I think we have to recognize the nature of that. We have to recognize the history of it, that two bits of history that are overlooked often, that when the country went into a partition, the riots that happened didn't actually happen in any scale before the 40s. And the country was split up in 46, 47. And by 51, at least one part of Pakistan, namely in Bangladesh, people were being killed not for religious extremism, but for their extremism about language. 5 people were killed, what would have been 5 days earlier in February 21st, in a college in Dhaka. That's just after partition. And even in the election in 36, 37, I can't remember, Muslim League did not actually win any state at all. In fact, Bengal, which is a Muslim majority state, did not have a Muslim League win until 1946, the year before the partition. It was always secular parties, Congress, Peasants' Party, and so on. And here I want to make a serious point, and then move away, but I hope we can come back to it at some stage. The big thing which made, of course, Muslim League possible in Bengal was land. Most of the land was actually, much of the landlords were Hindus, whereas most of the peasants and the underdog were Muslim. And it's certainly true that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman brought in a perspective that was much more profound than anything that's happened earlier. But the fact is that somebody like Fazlul Haq, or a secular, largely secular Bengali leader, would have had great difficulty to sell a story that Hindu-Muslim division didn't matter when its correlate and reflection on land ownership was very great. And actually, everyone here, you said you want to see young faces, and you say what this old man is doing, he's recollecting the past. There's a reason for doing it. How come Bengal was full of Hindu landlords? How was it being governed? When Murshidabad became the capital of Bengal from Dhaka, Murshid Quli Khan's time, the entire kingdom moved, and it was a Muslim king. The last king killed was Siddharth Varadarajan. And when Clive decided to capture, he was lying to his street and telling everyone that he wants to have a friendly relationship with Siddharth Varadarajan, and he was marching with his army to have a friendly relationship. And he made it, and he said that I've written a letter to Siddharth saying, consult your friends, and you will see that they all agree with me that there's no point in our fighting. And then he mentioned 9 names from Siddharth's close friends, 7 of whom are Hindus and 2 Muslims. Now, there was no plan of having Muslim upper class in Bengal. In a way, there wasn't a plan, but that's the way history had unearthed in Lucknow and UP. It wasn't like that. So the history of the country is very divided, and it's one where the Hindu-Muslim division quite often did not have the kind of roots at all that a situation would demand. And as you know, and which is why when we were asked the question, how come Bangladesh could become stable after having been East Pakistan? But the answer is the whole thing was a very ephemeral affair. In some ways, the distinction between Hindu-Muslims in the Western side was stronger, but never quite like what it is being built up to be now. You see, now we have reached a state where actually to like Pakistani friend whose wedding you go to when that occurs in an accessible place would be regarded as a lack of patriotism of some kind. So what we are seeing is an implanting of a division. There's not a historical division, really. It's not just Akbar. Here's a trick question. What is the largest memorial built for the mother of the largest translator of Hindu scriptures into foreign languages? Huh? The answer is Taj Mahal, because the Darshiko was the first translator of the Upanishad, single-handedly translated many, along with his Pandit friend, made all kinds of statements which upset his Muslim father in particular, but many others. And his mother was, of course, Mumtaz Mahal, after whom Taj Mahal is named. Now, it was regarded as a great eccentricity on the part of Darshiko. Real eccentricity, that he would be studying Sanskrit and so on. It's not something that would make him look a kind of different from a human being. Aurangzeb's son, who was also called Akbar, revolted against him, spent a lot of time with the Rajputs and then with the Marathas, and along with his Hindu servant, and was ultimately, Aurangzeb managed to kill him. But when he is writing a letter, he was writing a letter to Aurangzeb saying, you describe the Hindus as being like that, but they're not like that. I've been living with them over the years. This is not Aurangzeb's brother, it's his son he's talking about. Aurangzeb himself had, and though he's meant to be anti-Hindu, had about a third of his court people were Hindu. So I think the first thing to recognize is that something is being planted in our mind about the division, which is not a historical division. And that's important to recognize, because the historical division, as we know from the Palestinian situation, is very hard to elaborate. Now, there's a whole history of Jews across the world, including in Kerala, and so on, and being persecuted, not by Muslims. In fact, when Maimonides was seeking a shelter, he found his shelter in Cairo, in Saladin's capital, and so he was fleeing Spain, the Christian Spain, via Morocco, ultimately to Egypt, which is a Muslim kingdom. So I think there's history is a subject which is taught, and I'm delighted that it is taught. But the question often arises, why do we study history? not just to learn from what happened, but also to see what divisions have been planted in our mind and why. Right now, the planting is very closely connected, in my judgment, with not only the war that's going on, but the kind of division that the elections no doubt will produce. So I think I would begin by saying that if we do not, in many ways, undermine the division that's part of the official thought, we are not doing justice to history. And that's the point that I want to make. Now, you might think that I made it in a very elaborate way. But I can be more elaborate, but I won't carry out that thread even more.
If I stick with this idea of,
Yeah.
of a division being implanted, it seems as if at the global level, in India, it's become more respectable to give vent to openly communal statements, things that I would never have heard people say 10, 15, 20 years ago, certainly not people on television, not anchors. And similarly, in the United States, it's as if it's become more respectable to be racist. In Europe, anti-Semitism has a new lease of life. What explains the rise or the re-emergence of these kinds of beliefs, sentiments, ideologies across the globe at a time when, I mean, you have rising literacy, you have greater flows of information, rising standards of living, but despite that, and across the board, Hungary, India, wherever you look, it's these views, retrogressive views, divisive views, chauvinist views that seem to be on the up and up.
I think that's an extraordinarily good question. I think Hungary, Poland, East Germany, and a large, unbelievably, parts of Italy, show something which is really quite new. That's not the way the world was even in the 1930s. There was a different division between Germany and others. But the interesting issue is that that's a phenomenon that's quite different from the phenomenon of Islamophobia that you see in America and to a great extent in much of Europe. That's not a specific feature of Hungary and Poland, though it takes very often the form. It's bound to, like when there's Brexit propaganda, when they're showing pictures of immigrants coming in, they are talking really about European immigrants, but if you look at the pictures, they all look like Arabs, they all look like Syrians coming in. That's kind of combining tactics with, and in this case, pretty evil tactics with a real situation. I think the Islam issue raises much bigger time that you and I may have to get another time, because it has moved a lot. If you lived in the world of 19th century and early 20th century, and if you talk with an average European, there is no question that Islamic civilization is regarded as a far superior situation than the Hindu civilization. And you have the Arabian Nights, you have the people going to Cairo, you have the murder in Orient Express, this being the more later, I think. And in India, if you take James Mill, he was an equal opportunity vilifier, so he absolutely wrote nasty things about every non-white people. But when it came to Hindus and Muslims, there's no question that Muslims have some bare elements of civilization which Hindus totally lack. And there are lots of things that you can easily pick up which would indicate that Hindus, because of their primitiveness and barbarity, would be capable of, which the single God worshipping non-heathen Muslims never would. Things have changed. The world as I was waking up in the 30s, born in 33, was that the Muslims were all losing power bit by bit. I happened to be quite lucky in being in a boat in a ship going from Bombay to London through Suez Canal, just when Nasser came in and grabbed the canal. And then you suddenly heard a lot of anti-Muslim stories. And this is the only time I remember it very well, when the ship stopped in Suez and everyone was asked to stand in a queue. They would not be let off the ground. We were all in a queue going off the ship on the steps, and I was on the 7th floor. And then a smartly dressed Egyptian officer in a white starched shirt came round and asked me where I was from. And I said I was from India. And then he immediately captured me, took me down, and said, you don't have to stand in the queue. You can go and see the town. And he put me in a bus. The reason I remember it is the only time, since I'm an Indian citizen and used to standing in queues everywhere, the only time in my whole life, I'm 85 now, when I have been favorably treated for being an Indian. This is the beginning of what you are looking at. And then, of course, the Islamophobia had, in its own process, grown. And so has the reaction and the Islam state and so on has emerged. So the thing that the Indians and the Indian guys have seen as the Hindu kingdom is very connected with that. I wouldn't say that I think there are lots of things where the internal politics is connected. That in itself is not. What is connected is that even though we tend to think of the Hindu-Muslim being two nations, a Jinnah's two-nation theory, the theory was first articulated from the Hindu side. I can't remember whether it was Diamond. Savarkar. It was Savarkar who did that. So that certainly adds to that story. But right now, I think the advantage Indians get is something which is really generated elsewhere. And we are getting the result of it. It may not stay very long. And since I don't believe great discrimination on either side, I hope it doesn't stay.
The problem of migrants or immigration, which is also central to a lot of the hardening of attitudes that we see in Europe or even in North America. It's a complex issue. I mean, in the sense that as an economist, you could argue that societies would unambiguously benefit, aging societies would unambiguously benefit from being liberal as far as allowing migrants to come in. If you compare countries which have a more liberal immigration policy, like Canada or Australia or the US, with those in Europe or Japan that don't, you can see the great difference that migration plays. And yet, there is no getting away from the sense of, the cultural insecurities that migration also generates. We see it in India, in Assam, where we have this whole controversy over the National Register of Citizens, and of course the BJP had assumed that the Assamese who want Bengali migrants out would be seduced by the communalism of the BJP and would say, fine, Hindu Bengalis are okay. But the Assamese are too smart for that, so they say, no, we don't want any Bengalis.
But it was never a part of their thinking.
Yes, exactly. but yet, when you look at the anxieties in Assam, I mean, one may be less sympathetic to somebody in Germany or somebody in Poland or Hungary who is resentful of migrants coming in. But when you see in Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh, outsiders in a way taking over, so Adivasis are a minority. So how does one resolve in your mind the dilemma, the challenge and the opportunity that migration brings with the need to preserve certainly the cultural rights of those whose land it originally is?
I don't know that the challenge that migration brings could be really compared with the benefits that migration brings. Sitting in India, we were talking about languages. We were talking about that. By the way, before I forget, I ought to say, Bihar has a role in that. Because when Sanskrit split into three parts, and the two that we're dealing with here, namely Sauraseni, based mainly in UP, and Magadhi, we're talking about the genesis of the Magadhi, and then the later form, namely Ardha Magadhi. I may be one of the few persons in the world which at one stage could read Ardha Magadhi. The Ardha Magadhis fit into languages generated, including Assamese, who did not think so well of how to deal with Hindu Bengalis as opposed to Muslim Bengalis. The Assamese, the Bengalis, and the Orias, these are results of Ardha Magadhi. All of them lost their gender around the 9th to 12th century. And the problem that I have with Hindi is getting the gender right. It's absolutely impossible. If you are raised in a language in which there is no gender, suddenly to invent gender, my God, that's difficult. But coming back to your story, I mean, whatever may be the BJP official view now about the origin of Sanskrit, there is no question that it migrated into India. And then if you look at Thailand to Indochina, to Indonesia, to Korea, to parts of China, to Japan, it migrated that way. And it's in fact on language, literature, science, education, philosophy. It's absolutely extraordinary. So I think I would have difficulty in viewing problems of migration with the same sense of seriousness as the problems of, as the benefits of migration. And that applies to science in America, even going back, science in Germany, science in Britain. And it's also concerned with people having an interest elsewhere. When I was young, I had this notion since I was reading a lot of Shakespeare and great interest in Italy. I told myself I'd love to have Shakespeare's diary about his visits to Italy. And, you know, I'd like to know when is it he went to Venice, where Othello is landing, and who the two gentlemen in Verona, where they were in Verona talking to. When it became quite clear that I got it wrong. Shakespeare never went to Italy. It's just that they were interested in each other. So, along with migration, what we're looking at is interest in each other. And that ultimately is, I think, one of the greatest forces for good in the world. Not only it's because it spends philosophy and music and science and counting and so on, but also because it has the potential for making friends out of people. And you know, we sometimes forget the first printed book in the world is a Chinese book printed in 868. It is a translation of what in English they call Diamond Sutra. The Sanskrit name for it is Vajrachedika Prajna Paramita. Now, and that was, it's an old Sanskrit book, but it was translated first time 401 AD by Kumarjiva, who was half Turkish, half Indian. It was translated 8 more times. In 868 it was translated into Chinese. And what did the dedication say? The dedication said, in memory of my parents and for universal free distribution in the world. The first printed book. So there was and of course that was, you know, the Koreans were doing the same, and the Japanese were trying to do the same. I think if there's a big motive in my talk, and including talking about Pakistan and Bangladesh and so on, it's just that knowing each other, a point that Al-Biruni made in 1015, in a book called Tariq al-Hind, History of India, that the reason why we have to study each other is because a natural tendency for us is to suspect each other. And that generates violence. And the reason why I'm writing this book, Al-Biruni was a mathematician. He learned Sanskrit, and he translated our Sanskrit book. He translated in mathematical book too, including Brahmagupta's book, and commented on Aryabhata's book. But he was concerned that people in the Arab world, he wrote in Arabic, he was in fact an Iranian, because the Iranians and the Arabic world, and the whole Arab world spreading all the way to Cordoba in Spain, could then read something about India. By the way, I can't resist saying that while he says many interesting things about India, his remark that I like most is to say that here I've been in this country for 10 years. I admire their mathematics, I admire their philosophy, but nothing can I admire as much as the extraordinary ability of Indians to speak eloquently on subjects on which they know absolutely nothing.
Professor Sen, if I can turn to the populism part of our discussion. The populism part of our discussion.
Yeah.
The term means different things to different people. It's You have right-wing populism, you have left-wing populism. There is a tendency for people to compare certain kinds of leaders. For example, often Modi and Trump are clubbed together as representing the same kind of social or political phenomenon. How do you, in your book or in your view, how do you see the advent of, what explains the advent of populism broadly defined in polity after polity?
And to add to Siddharth,
Yes.
because when we were discussing this issue of populism, you said that Indian case is very different from European or American case. So if I remember you correctly, so would you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, I said something slightly different from that, but I'll come to that if I may, Purva. But the first thing to deal with Siddharth's question, you know, populism is a common phenomenon in the world. People form a view, and then that view becomes widespread. And unless you resist it. And then you could spread it and use it. When the first millennium Christian was coming to an end, there was a complete scare over Europe that all of the world would be destroyed. And since that became so popular that people were worried about how to prevent perishing in that catastrophe. There was quite a literature on that subject about the end of the world, 1000 AD. And then nobody here thought partly because we didn't have a Christian calendar in quite that form. But even though it was known in Kerala, since Christians were there from 4th century AD, if some story goes wrong, it can generate great relief. I think the reason why we don't eat certain types of food, I believe even beef and pork ban was connected with somehow convincing yourself that it will do you a lot of harm. Now, really, I know there's another story about the sacredness of cow and so on, but that's a different kind of story. When I was young, I was hitchhiking with a friend of mine called Rahman Suvan from what was then East Pakistan, and we would get lift sometime in hitchhiking. And in Sweden, we got lift together from someone who decided to give us a meal. And he said that, tell me, I'm so interested that, is it right that some of you from South Asia don't eat beef and some of you don't eat pork? Is that right that one of you don't eat beef or you don't eat pork? Then the one said, well, the master has no taste, so he eats everything. But actually, a proper Hindu does not eat beef. And as a proper Muslim, he wasn't a proper Muslim, he was pretending. He said, I don't eat pork. And then he said, however, this is the point of great importance to Rahman, there is a difference. Hindus don't eat beef because they regard the animal called cow to be holy. Muslims don't eat pork because we regard pigs to be dirty. There is a big difference between the two. Now that befuddled the mind of the Swede even more. And as we were going out, he gave us a little lift to the train station. And he said, we must continue the discussion. And he looked at Rahman and he said, you must sometime explain to me why is it that Muslims regard figs to be holy. I told Rahman that you better learn economics well, because you're not going to get a job as an anthropology teacher. Absolutely fair. But these are popular beliefs, really, and then the fascist recruiter goes into a village and explains why fascism is far superior. You see, Mussolini has taken over and the trains are running on time. Malaria has been eradicated from the Eastern District. You must join the fascist party. And this person says, listen, I can't join the fascist party because, you see, my father was a socialist, my grandfather was a socialist. I could not possibly join the fascist party. And this fascist said, what kind of a silly argument is this? Just because your father was a socialist and grandfather was a socialist doesn't stop you from being whatever you want. What would you have done if, for example, your father was a murderer and grandfather was a murderer? What would you have done then? To which this simple villager said, well, in that case, of course, I would have joined the fascist party. So I think there are a lot of beliefs that we have which are very much in our mind, and given a suitable opportunity, it may come out. I don't think there's something very special about Trump and Modi today, nor about all these, even this war and Hungary thing that's happening. The question is how to encounter it, and that's where our problem lies. And I have to say that comparing Europe with Modi and the Hindutva, it raises a very different issue, particularly because of connection with religion. But if you compare Europe with America, I would say at this time there is more going on in America to resist Trumpism than there is going on in Europe to resist Islamophobia or anti-immigrant things. Yeah. Right. And it's important. You know, sometimes I'm critical of America. I wasn't critical today, by the way. You recognize this would have been illegal in America, in the sense that because of the disability law, you cannot have an access which a disabled person as I am now would not be able to negotiate. I could take you to court. That. But there's no corresponding thing. In America, I remember taking a flight from New York to I think it was, I think it was Hamburg, and trying to get in the airport, and there's nothing other than steps to climb up. I would have straight away sued it had it been the United States. So I think there's a lot of fighting going on, and right now, I think there's a lot to learn from what's going on there's a lot to learn from Europe, but there's a lot to learn from what's going on in America. There's a lot to learn from each other right now at this time.
And the specificity of what Apurva was saying about India, because here, what marks the BJP out, or what marks this kind of so-called populism or communalism or fascism, whatever you want to call it, is the presence of an organization like the RSS, which is quite unique in many ways.
I don't know how unique RSS is, because there are a whole lot of I shouldn't make simple comparison, similar beliefs, as you know, to compare them with fascists would be would be too strong, but certainly strong belief of that kind, which you're not ready to question, is known in Europe, certainly known in America. The anti-anarchist movement in America. Lots of the rules we follow are based on such beliefs. I mean, for example, every time I go to, say, Germany, it is quite a problem for me to stand at a red light when there's no traffic in any direction and not cross the street. It seems to me that anything I've learned in India is denied by that degree of hesitation. One occasion I remember I was trying to, I think it was Hanover, I stood there. After a little while I said, look, this is damn silly. There's no car anywhere at all. So I crossed it and there was a chap on the other side. And he looked at me and I thought I was very famous because he said, Professor Sen, you don't cross the street when it's red. So I was very pleased that he recognized me. So I said, I thought I would be condescending to him, who seemed to deserve. So I said, well, where did we meet last, I asked him. And he said, no, we have never met. You are wearing your conference badge. But the habit of not crossing is something you cannot cultivate. If you have not done it. I mean, when I went to China, I want to say that the Chinese are like India, and I think they're more in the sense that they will run when they say a motorcycle is coming before it gets there. So I don't think there's any discipline that the Chinese have, and they do have more discipline than Indian, is not arising from there, wherever it may be arising from. Now, coming back to this, I think the real thing is not the RSS. I think we have integrated our populism with our general divisionism of which caste and tribe are a part. So that quite often we are not even concerned whether we are carrying the entire people with us. For example, cows have been eaten by the non-caste Hindus for a long time, and not many people buy it, except when it becomes an issue like today, whereby you treat it as a way of penalizing the lower caste for eating beef, for doing skin trade, and so on. So the Indian combination of the animosity that goes with division in terms of caste and tribe has given the populism a further shape that European populism standardly does not have. That's what I
Professor Sen, we've done about 55 minutes. I want to open the floor now for questions. So if you can, there are microphones around, and if you can put your hands up, and so that I can identify you one by one. And so we'll start with the young lady here.
So please raise your hand.
Thank you very much. Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Sen. I think your remarks were indeed incredible. So in 1999, you published this book, amazing, iconic reading, which is which goes out to like every discipline, Development as Freedom, which talks about a lot of unfreedoms that states face today in terms of poverty, unemployment, sexism. It's been 20 years since that book has been published. If you were to write that book today, given the context in which the world and specifically India is going through today, how differently would you write it?
It's a very good question. You see, I think partly in that book, I was engaged in some ideas which I thought was shared across the world, including valuing life and capability rather than just income. And that's why I think I begin with a conversation. That conversation was. I think it was from the Upanishad. And the book tries to make that point also, that A, that what we are concerned with is what we are able to do, and B, this is a thought that has been shared across the world. Yeah. And I think it was Maitreyi I was talking about, Maitreyi and her husband. But I think it's clear to me that there are also some divisions right now, not historically, they've always been there, because the way we have historically evolved, that our problems have ended up being somewhat different. The problems of the Japanese, and the problems of the Americans, and the problems of Germany today are in many ways different. And I think probably the book should have recognized that a bit more. Not a lot more, because you also want to emphasize the shared humanitarian aspect. I happened to go through, I was an undergraduate in Cambridge shortly after the war. I went there 53. And when I was traveling around, one of the interesting things for me to see is how the German population, or their interests were shifting. Because this is a group that only less than 10 years ago where the destruction of non-German sources of power was their major objective. And yet, by 53 or 54 that I'm talking about, things have moved on. Sometimes not coherently. And to give an example, I used to go, I loved this boat trip there I had a lot of classmates who came from Calcutta who were doing engineering in Aachen, Duisburg, Cologne, and so on. And I will, and by the way, we spoke in Bengali to each other, but we were told to be very careful not to bring in names like Hitler, because a lot of people are still, I was told, have great belief in Hitler, and they could be upset. So I asked one of these fellow Bengalis, saying, "What do you do when you speak?" He said, we speak in Bengali. I said, "What in Bengali for Hitler is Hitler." To which he said, "No, you're completely mistaken. When we refer to him in Bengali, we call him Hitu Babu." So anyway, I don't know what Hitu Babu would have made of that, but in not long after when I was taking one of those boat trips that you could buy a ticket in Cologne and go all the way to mine and stop anywhere you like. I was traveling with a group of English students, and they wanted to go to a wine festival with the sign. So I got up at Rudishan and really deeply regretted staying on until 3 a.m. With them in that pub, in that bar. And especially since I don't like sweet wine. But there, one of the German girls, another student in a different group joined us, said, so where you come from, what is it called? And I said, well, it's called Bengal or Bangla. And he said, no, historically, what's it called? So I said, well, what do you mean historically? Well, what was it called many years ago? And then she said, I'm a historian. So I said, well, there were two parts, one's called gold and the other is called Banga. And we said, oh, I like Banga very much. I think we had a reasonable amount to drink. And then he said, am I right in thinking that Banga is close to Congo? I said, no, you are not right to think. And I took a napkin, I drew a map of Africa and Asia, and put Bongo and Congo in the winning thing. And then she said, but we have to get them together. I said, look, you're completely talking nonsense because geography prevents you from getting Bongo and Congo together. And he said, I don't mean geographically. I mean that they have to get them together. I said, what do you mean, together? And then she said, they're neighbors. Now, that's almost like Jesus in the Good Samaritan. And I said, but they're not neighbors. There have to be neighbors. Everyone is a neighbor. Now, I remember when I went to sleep at 4 o'clock, that ringing in my ear. Here's a German girl, probably daughter of someone who has been fighting for über alles Deutschland, trying to dominate everyone. And if you look at Germany today, and you will not surprise if it is the case that if the German president offers to give $1 million place to Syria. There's change going on. This is very exciting, about how countries change, and that's why the Indo-Pakistani thing that we begin with. So I think maybe I should not have been as hostile to nationality as I was in the book. That's the way I would answer it, I think.
Hello, Professor. Sir, my question is that of late, particularly after 2014 elections, we are seeing this very strange phenomenon that suddenly the state has become synonymous with the nation. And so, if we question the government, then we are questioning the nation, and then we are anti-national. Earlier, if we used to question the government, then we used to be leftist. But now if we are questioning the government, then we are anti-national. Is this because that we have a very strong leader at the helm who has very strong following who will latch upon you if you speak against him? Is this a temporary phenomena? How do you assess this?
Well, this is a very complicated question. I don't think we identify government with the nation. I know students who are being charged of sedition. And I'm coming from a lecturing in JNU. Express my admiration for an institution to be able to find so many people doing sedition today. It shows a level of a flight of imagination which is difficult to comprehend generally. From time to time they release them. I think they arrested 14 in Aligarh Muslim University and then released them saying, no, we made a mistake. They are not doing sedition. Now, sedition would be kind of violently destroying a government or a state. Yeah. I don't think we do that. But let me take a different point connected with your general remark. Being anti-government indicates that you disagree with their policy. I mean, there are two types of being anti-government, really. There's one type where you think the government is making a mistake. You want to criticize, you belong to a different party. You want to say, in honor of this building, that you ought to be a Congress supporter rather than BJP supporter or Trinamool supporter or Communist Party supporter. Second, to say that this is really, if you were religious, called evil, something terrible, not just a mistake, like, sowing discord. And here I say without, I know that I could be charged with sedition. It's like the governor of Tripura describing, saying that Kashmiris have some major fault in them. Yeah, and you could describe it as evil because in some ways it's dividing people in a way that is not. And then there's a third thing, which is when a government believes in magic. like demonetization. So I think there's different types of anti-governmenting, and some of them have a good reason. I think there may be sometimes good reason for being anti-nation too. Nation is not our only identity. Who were the great anti-nation people? Rabindranath Tagore? In some occasion, Mahatma Gandhi? I think they are, depending on what the context is, you could have the liberty, take the liberty of being against your national identity as opposed to many other identities that we also happen to have. And I think it's this, I think this point really, I'm planting this point on you because you raised a convenient point and a good question. We have multiple identities of a kind which would be very difficult to escape from. And we have good reason to pursue them. And if we see a member of my nation, belong to the same nation, being tortured or badly treated by a member of, put it differently, is being tortured, but is being resisted by a member of another nation. Nothing wrong of me to have sympathy with that person, rather than his fellow national who is torturing him. So we do have multiple identity, and these indicate the multiplicity of our abilities to think. And that's really extraordinarily important in leading a life. So I don't think we should ever take a view that we should not be anti-nation, anti-government, anything. Now, in most occasions, do we have a reason, good reason to be in favor of your nation? Yes, we live together, we work together, we can help each other, and so being anti-national, you have to explain why you being it. It deserves an explanation. It demands an explanation. On the other hand, that doesn't mean there is no explanation ever. If that were the case, then you won't be able to read Rabindranath Tagore's Crisis in Civilization, for example. You won't be able to read a lot of Shakespeare, and you won't characters like Sartre or Brecht.
Yes, please. We'll take questions
Yeah.
from the balcony.
Yeah, hello. This is Suchit here. Thanks for enlightening us. My question is related to the idea of populism. I want to relate to your argument, your own argument that Indian, argumentative Indian. So, what are the reason why the argumentative Indian nowadays become so intolerant? And so, do you feel that this intolerable Indian arguments could counter this populist narrative and create a alternative phenomena and challenge this whole populist narrative in an Indian context? Thank you.
Yeah, again, a very interesting issue. You know, as I think I did make clear, I knew that calling him the argumentative Indian is a real hostage to fortune. I did say that every nation is argumentative, but my point was that we have celebrated that in a big way as a technique of learning. Now, you may or may not know, and you have no reason to know, that I was Chancellor of Nalanda University for a while, until the government decided that Nalanda is not going to get anything until that blot in its record be removed. And it was removed in the form of my resigning. But I did a deal that Giorgio, the former foreign minister of Singapore, will become chancellor. And they agreed to do everything possible to help Giorgio. But of course, once I got rid of me and George became chancellor, they didn't do most of the things that he wanted, so he left. Now, George and I was talking about that. The interesting point was if there's anything extraordinarily special about Nalanda, a university in Bihar. Bihar had 5 universities at that time, which was not only a university in a world without universities, and 700 years older than Bologna, the oldest European university, and a place where you had excellent teaching from philosophy and linguistics to mathematics and astronomy. The other thing was that Nalanda, as a system of education, had decided that teaching would not be standard lectures, but argument. So it took the form, and this is described. You see, we have to be grateful to the Chinese because they are quite keen on writing things around them. There were relatively few Chinese in Nalanda, but nearly everything we know about Nalanda are about what the Chinese wrote, some Korean. Indian didn't write very much about it. But on the very first day, Human Sang arrived, he was told that there is a debate going on between 2 great debaters. And he asked, why should I go there? He said, well, that's how we learn things here. And it's explained that that's what the mode of curricular tradition is. Namely, the teacher makes a point, you are supposed to disagree and pursue that. So I think what happened here is to take on a tradition And my quoting Whiteway was only one of them. I quote also in my other book, another book called Country for First Boys, that Vedas is full of debates. They're not mentioned, but Vedas are also taken to be truth. But they can't be all true if they're arguing about the position. And Upanishads are all argument. Gita is all argument between Krishna and Arjuna. And some of us take the view that maybe Arjuna did win the argument rather than Krishna. That position is possible for you to take. In fact, Mahabharata as an epic ends with a pictures of complete desolation, vindicating Arjuna's position that even though the good side wins, they inherit so much barbarity and killing with dead bodies everywhere, women weeping over their dead husbands and so on. That is not clear whether, in fact, what was the right side to take. Mahabharata leaves that as an unclear point. But if you're interested on that issue, I'll give you a reference of a paper of mine in the Journal of Philosophy discussing that. And so I think Indians are argumentative, but so is everyone else. So are the Greeks, so are the Romans, and so are the English. But we made more of the argumentative tradition in a standard way, and in a standard part of our education and point of the argumentative Indian. And that is continued to, Akbar, and I was also mentioning Aurangzeb's son a few minutes ago, and so on. And that's a tradition. It's thought that Akbar actually invited Dadu, one of the poets like Kabir would mention, for a 40-day stay in Fatehpur Sikri to argue with Akbar about what's correct. Now, I think that tradition there is a new thing. Now, your question is, therefore, today, have we, in some ways, slipped from that tradition? If people are taken to the court for sedition, I think we have. And this I'm saying strongly, even if I'm taken to sedition for that. Because if you disagree with the government, that cannot be a reason for sedition. It's not only that the Supreme Court had already given a judgment on that subject earlier, even if the Supreme Court had not given any judgment, sedition has a meaning. So happened the Supreme Court did give a judgment on that earlier. My only complaint about the Supreme Court now is that they allow these statements to go on without putting them before court much earlier. Why should it go on? In this case, as it happens, some of the people even get beaten while they are in custody, which is again an impossibly unacceptable situation. So I think if there is an intolerance of argument, and if you kill people because they do trade in cow skin, leather, or eat beef, or could store in your refrigerator some meat which might possibly look like beef, then that is a violation of some basic aspects of humanity. And if we have lost that, we have lost a lot. And if there's something to fight for, it is to reinstate the foundational human rights that we all should have. So you're quite right to ask that question. If I got the question right, and if I got the question wrong, then think whether you ought to have asked that question.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। खुशी की बात है हमें और आपको एक साथ यहाँ पे इकट्ठा जमा किया। क्वेश्चन बहुत आसान है पर समझना बहुत मुश्किल है। क्या है कि अभी का जो हालात चल रहा है और इस हालात से हमारा बखूबी बेहतर जानते हैं।
आप सवाल करें सीधे।
ये है कि हमारा ये सवाल है कि अभी जो हादसा पुलवामा को लेकर के हुआ, उसके लेकर के गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने बहुत जल्द उन्होंने एक कार्रवाई की और पाकिस्तान से उन्होंने बदला लिया। बहुत खुशी की बात है, मगर अफसोस यहाँ ये होता है कि इसी हिंदुस्तान के अंदर दामनी का केस और आसिफा को लेकर के हमारा आपसे क्वेश्चन है कि अभी तक उसके बारे में कोई मसले का हल नहीं हुआ। आप इसके बारे में गौर ख़ौस करें।
मेरे ख्याल में ये सवाल बहुत ज़्यादा स्पेसिफिक है, लोकल है, इसलिए प्रोफेसर सेन से सवाल मुनासिब नहीं। इधर पहले हाथ उठा, इधर हम 2 सवाल और लेंगे क्योंकि
Good evening, sir.
Right
here. Sir, at a time like this, what advice would you give us as ordinary citizens? What can we do to stand against the rising darkness? We would really appreciate some ideas and advice from you.
You know, we do live in a democracy. I think the answer is staring at our face. That includes voting, but not just voting. It includes discussing these issues. It invites us to do what Apurva had done, namely to have this gathering, and what Siddharth had done, namely to agree to come and discuss an argue. I think I don't think there's any battle in the world has ever been won without argument. And argumentative India is maybe too specific, as I explained, a title for a quality, namely argumentation, which should be a general technique of approaching each other across the world. The fact is that we ought to recognize that it's not just a matter of our permission to do argument, it is a matter of our duty to argue. And that's why this whole issue of sedition is so wrong. Because if you think the government is making a mistake, it's your duty, not just your ability, your right, your freedom to talk about it. It's your duty to do it. If you think that people are being killed for religious reason or tribal reason, or for that matter political reasons, and in a way that's wrong, if you didn't do anything, then you're making a big mistake. I think can we win a battle of this kind? The answer is yes. We've done it again and again. And I think if we don't win it, it would be because we didn't try sufficiently hard to do it. You don't have to be as crazy as I was, last general election, whereby one morning I left Boston, flew to New York, and took a plane in the afternoon from New York to New Delhi, and took a plane in the evening from New Delhi to Calcutta, then went to the car and drove to Shantiniketan and voted. This was in 2014. And then took a car, took the same car back to Dum Dum Airport, and then to Delhi, and then to New York, and then to Boston within 3 days. That you might think to be crazy, and I think is not a good use of my money. Because I couldn't have influenced the election very much. On the other hand, am I unhappy I did it? No, I'm not unhappy. Should I do it every year? Perhaps not. I think I made my point. But I wish people would take it seriously enough, not just voting, everything that democracy allows us to do. And that includes all the, penalties that may go with it, including arrest and beating in custody. I believe that Nalini has been now absolved of an extraordinarily constituted crime. I think these are part of the thing that citizenship requires us to do. And, if you retain, as I do, your Indian citizenship, it's for some reason, not just, if you think I do it only because I love standing in a queue, then you are mistaken. I do it for some other reason, and so do you. And so I think the participation and argumentation do not have any, the good Sanskrit word, no vikalpa. There is no substitute for that. Thank you.
One last question.
No more.
As Mr. Varadarajan pointed out, okay, I'm just going to come straight to the question, okay. So Dr. Sen, thank you so much. But from an economist's vantage point, I want to ask if you could point out the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, in Malcolm Gladwell. It's not important, like just a tipping point. What set it off? This whole wave, this right-wing wave across the globe of xenophobia, fascism, and sweeping across the globe. What set it off? What was the tipping point? Like we looked to it, like Brazil or Hungary, in India, the United States, everywhere. It's just rising massive xenophobia and fascism. What could possibly have set it off? There's clearly a right-wing wave across the globe, and it's alarming and very disturbing. Thank you.
I didn't fully actually. You're speaking too fast.
I'm so sorry. I can.
What's the tipping point? These things that emerge, fascism and xenophobia.
What is the tipping point for the emergence of that, or what's the tipping point for me to stand up against it? I think the tipping point for me is parents. You have to, at every context, you have to ask yourself, what should I do? And sometimes it could be just telling yourself, gosh, I ought to do something, don't I? Is it Led Belly, the American folk singer, who was being somewhat maltreated? He thought by the business world when he went to Washington to sing in a gathering. And was being turned from hotel to hotel, and he just sang. He didn't do anything. Turned an old American song around saying, in the country of the brave and the home of the free, I will not be put down by the bourgeoisie. That was just a statement. I don't think it did anything literally. I don't think it was in the revolt. I think the first thought is disagreement, and if it's wrong, revulsion. The next thought is, I'm answering your second question, if it was your second question, then when you arrive, and then to say, what can I do? Is there anything I ought to do about it? By the way, I do have a serious philosophical discussion of that in the book called Idea of Justice, as to what human rights require. Human rights require that you think about them, others think about them, and others have also to think, is it sufficiently serious for me to do something? And then ask, am I in a position to do something given all my other responsibilities towards my children, towards my job, and so on? And then, ultimately, what should I do? So that's on the receiving side. The other side, what is the tipping point for that? I don't know the tipping point for such a revolt to arise could be all kinds of things. I mean, if you look at the history of fascism, Nazism, history of the authoritarian movements of different kinds that have arisen in different parts of the world. And I think I would be making a mistake if I was going to try to make a generalization of it. And I don't think you want to hear a generalization on that. But if you do arrive at a generalization, write it in a postcard and post it to me.
স্যার স্যারকে একটাই প্রশ্ন স্যারকে স্যার आखिरी
सेन साहब को थकाना नहीं चाहते हैं
हाँ ना जस्ट एक ही
अभी वो हमें हम पर मुकदमा करने वाले हैं जी
sir you are coming from Bengal and
where are you?
Yeah. And from the very beginning we are coaching the Shobhotar Shankar, which is crisis of civilization also. But very unfortunate it's right now we observed the emergence of right-wing force in your Bengal. Even some of there also, you are being targeted there also. So right now, what is your recommendation? What is your observation about your Bengal?
Well, I don't think it's any different from what I've said. Have I said something which you think is contradictory to what I had said earlier?
Absolutely not. But though the situation is going on, that is why. There is
what kind of situation do you have in mind?
Like competitive communalism. Like competitive communalism, the emergence of competitive communalism in Bengal.
In Bangladesh or West Bengal?
No, West Bengal. Yes. West Bengal, particularly.
You know, I don't take such an alarmist view of what's happening in West Bengal. You know, my belief is that the element of anti-communal forces are still quite strong in Bengal, and I think you would see that in the electoral result. I'm not commenting whether I like Trinamool or whether I would have preferred CCM and so on. That's a different type of it. But I would be very surprised if Hindutva gets a big support in the, it didn't, it got 2 seats in the last general election. At the time of the Modi wave of 2014, it had 2 seats, which is not a very large number. Admittedly the same as CPM, which is not to the glory of CPM. But my difficulty, I think you and I should chat on that. What makes you so nervous about the future of anti-communal unity in Bengal? I don't see signs of it. If you hear it, you always get in some form saying, well, Trinamool has become so autocratic and CPM doesn't exist, then we ought to vote for something. But what is there other than BJP? Now that's not a very healthy argument. It's very complicated for one thing. So I would, maybe you would drop me a line after the election telling me whether I am right or wrong, okay? And we can then continue. Among the things that keep me awake at night, this is not one of them.
Shri Vijay Mahajan, Director, Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Contemporary Studies. मैं उन्हें दावत देता हूँ कि वो कुछ ज़्यादा करें.
Thank you very much, Professor Sen.
Thank you.
What's been a wonderful dialogue with lots of argumentation. It was mostly one-sided. But, and I want to thank Siddharth as well as Apurva for organizing this, and Kavita. I hope that we've been worthy of the first Neelam Memorial Public event. Thank you all of you. This is the biggest attendance we've had in this Jawahar Bhavan, and that makes its own point. I hope before you leave, you will leave behind your email or your mobile number so that we can invite you for many more such events. Thank you very much.
Okay. Point of the argumentative Indian, and that is continued to, Akbar, and I was also mentioning Aurangzeb's son a few minutes ago, and so on. And that's a tradition. It's thought that Akbar actually invited Dadu, one of the poets like Kabir would mention, for a 40-day stay in Fatehpur Sikri to argue with Akbar about what's correct. Now, I think that tradition, there is a new thing. Now, your question is, therefore, today, have we, in some ways, slipped from that tradition? If people are taken to the court for sedition, I think we have. And this is what I'm saying strongly, even if I'm taken to sedition for that. Because if you disagree with the government, that cannot be a reason for sedition. It's not only that the Supreme Court had already given a judgment on that subject earlier, even if the Supreme Court had not given any judgment, sedition has a meaning. So happened the Supreme Court did give a judgment on that earlier. My only complaint about the Supreme Court now is that they allow these statements to go on without putting them before court much earlier. Why should it go on? In this case, as it happens, some of the people even get beaten while they are in custody, which is again an impossibly unacceptable situation. So I think if there is an intolerance of argument, and if you kill people because they do trade in cow skin, leather, or eat beef, or could store in your refrigerator some meat which might possibly look like beef, then that is a violation of some basic aspects of humanity. And if we have lost that, we have lost a lot. And if there's something to fight for, it is to reinstate the foundational human rights that we all should have. So you're quite right to ask that question. If I got the question right, and if I got the question wrong, then think whether you ought to have asked that question.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। खुशी की बात है हमें और आपको एक साथ यहाँ पे इकट्ठा जमा किया। क्वेश्चन बहुत आसान है पर समझना बहुत मुश्किल है। क्या है कि अभी का जो हालात चल रहा है और इस हालात से हमारा बखूबी बेहतर जानते हैं।
आप सवाल करें सीधे।
ये है कि हमारा ये सवाल है कि अभी जो हादसा पुलवामा को लेकर के हुआ, उसके लेकर के गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने बहुत जल्द उन्होंने कार्रवाई की और पाकिस्तान से उन्होंने बदला लिया। बहुत खुशी की बात है, मगर अफसोस यहाँ ये होता है कि इसी हिंदुस्तान के अंदर दामनी का केस और आसिफा को लेकर के हमारा आपसे क्वेश्चन है कि अभी तक उसके बारे में कोई मसले का हल नहीं हुआ। आप इसके बारे में गौर ख़ास करें।
मेरे ख्याल में ये सवाल बहुत ज़्यादा स्पेसिफिक है, लोकल है, इसलिए प्रोफेसर सेन से सवाल मुनासिब नहीं। इधर पहले हम दो सवाल और लेंगे क्योंकि
Good evening, sir.
Right
here. Sir, at a time like this, what advice would you give us as ordinary citizens? What can we do to stand against the rising darkness? We would really appreciate some ideas and advice from you.
You know, we do live in a democracy. I think the answer is staring at our face. That includes voting, but not just voting. It includes discussing these issues. It invites us to do what Apurva had done, namely to have this gathering, and what Siddharth had done, namely to agree to come and discuss an argue. I think I don't think there's any battle in the world has ever been won without argument. And argumentative India is maybe too specific, as I said, a title for a quality, namely argumentation, which should be a general technique of approaching each other across the world. The fact is that we ought to recognize that it's not just a matter of our permission to do argument, it is a matter of our duty to argue. And that's why this whole issue of sedition is so wrong. Because if you think the government is making a mistake, it's your duty, not just your ability, your right, your freedom to talk about it. It's your duty to do it. If you think that people are being killed for religious reason or tribal reason, or for that matter political reasons, and in a way that's wrong, if you didn't do anything, then you're making a big mistake. I think can we win a battle of this kind? The answer is yes. We've done it again and again. And I think if we don't win it, it would be because we didn't try sufficiently hard to do it. You don't have to be as crazy as I was last general election, whereby one morning I left Boston, flew to New York, and took a plane in the afternoon from New York to New Delhi, and took a plane in the evening from New Delhi to Calcutta, then went to the car and drove to Shantiniketan and voted. This was in 2014. And then took a car, took the same car back to Dum Dum Airport, and then to Delhi, and then to New York, and then to Boston within 3 days. That you might think to be crazy, and I think it's not a good use of my money. Because I couldn't have influenced the election very much. On the other hand, am I unhappy I did it? No, I'm not unhappy. Should I do it every year? Perhaps not. I think I made my point. But I wish people would take it seriously enough, not just voting, everything that democracy allows us to do. And that includes all the, penalties that may go with it, including arrest and beating in custody. I believe that Nalini has been now absolved of an extraordinarily constituted crime. I think these are part of the thing that citizenship requires us to do. And, if you retain, as I do, your Indian citizenship, it's for some reason, not just, if you think I do it only because I love standing in a queue, then you are mistaken. I do it for some other reason, and so do you. And so I think the participation and argumentation do not have any, good Sanskrit word, no vikalpa. There is no substitute for that. Thank you.
One last question.
No more.
As Mr. Varadarajan pointed out, okay, I'm just going to come straight to the question, okay. So Dr. Sen, thank you so much. But from an economist's vantage point, I want to ask if you could point out the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, in Malcolm Gladwell. It's not important, like just the tipping point. What set it off? This whole wave, this right-wing wave across the globe of xenophobia, fascism, and sweeping across the globe. What set it off? What was the tipping point? Like we looked to like Brazil or Hungary, in India, the United States, everywhere it's just rising massive xenophobia and fascism. What could possibly have set it off? There's clearly a right-wing wave across the globe, and it's alarming and very disturbing. Thank you.
I didn't fully actually, you're speaking too fast.
I'm so sorry, I can...
What's the tipping point? These things that emerge, fascism and xenophobia.
What is the tipping point for the emergence of that, or what's the tipping point for me to stand up against it? I think the tipping point for me is parents. You have to, at every context, you have to ask yourself, what should I do? And sometimes it could be just telling yourself, gosh, I ought to do something, don't I? Edith Ledwelly, the American folk singer, who was being somewhat maltreated, he thought, by the business world when he went to Washington to sing in a gathering, and was being turned from hotel to hotel, and he just sang. He didn't do anything. Turned an old American song around, saying, "In the country of the brave and the home of the free, I will not be put down by the bourgeoisie." That was just a statement. I don't think he did anything that really, I don't think, wrote in the revolt. I think the first thought is disagreement, and if it's strong, revulsion. The next thought is, I'm answering your second question, if it was your second question, then when you arrive, and then to say, what can I do? Is there anything I ought to do about it? By the way, I do have a serious philosophical discussion of that in the book called Idea of Justice, as to what human rights require. Human rights require that you think about them, others think about them, and others have also to think, is it sufficiently serious for me to do something? And then ask, am I in a position to do something given all my other responsibilities towards my children, towards my job, and so on? And then, ultimately, what should I do? So that's on the receiving side. The other side, what is the tipping point for that? I don't know the tipping point for such a revolt to arise could be all kinds of things. I mean, if you look at the history of fascism, Nazism, history of the authoritarian movements of different kinds that have arisen in different parts of the world. And I think I would be making a mistake if I was going to try to make a generalization of it. And I don't think you want to hear a generalization on that. But if you do arrive at a generalization, write it in a postcard and post it to me.
স্যার স্যারকে একটাই প্রশ্ন স্যারকে স্যার आखिरी
सेन साहब को थकाना नहीं चाहते हैं।
हाँ जस्ट एक ही
वो हम पर मुकदमा करने वाले हैं। जी
sir, you are coming from Bengal, and
where are you?
Yeah. And from the very beginning, we are coaching the Shobhotar Shankar, which is crisis of civilization also. But very unfortunate, it's right now we observed the emergence of right-wing force in your Bengal. Even some there also, you are being targeted there also. So right now, what is your recommendation? What is your observation about your Bengal?
Well, I don't think it's any different from what I've said. Have I said something which you think is contradictory to what I had said earlier?
Absolutely not. But though the situation is going on, that is why. There is
what kind of situation do you have in mind?
Like competitive communalism. Like competitive communalism, the emergence of competitive communalism in Bengal.
In Bangladesh or West Bengal?
No, West Bengal. Yes. West Bengal, particularly.
You know, I don't take such an alarmist view of what's happening in West Bengal. You know, my belief is that the element of anti-communal forces are still quite strong in Bengal, and I think you would see that in the electoral result. I'm not commenting whether I like Trinamool or whether I would have preferred CCM and so on. That's a different type of it. But I was very surprised if Hindutva gets a big support in the, it didn't, it got 2 seats in the last general election. At the time of the Modi wave of 2014, it had 2 seats, which is not a very large number. Admittedly the same as CPM, which is not to the glory of CPM. But my difficulty, I think you and I should chat on that. What makes you so nervous about the future of anti-communal unity in Bengal? I don't see signs of it. If you hear it, you always get in some form saying, well, Trinamool has become so autocratic and CCM doesn't exist, then we ought to vote for something. But what is there other than BJP? Now that's not a very healthy argument. It's very complicated for one thing. So I would, maybe you would drop me a line after the election telling me whether I am right or wrong, okay? And we can then continue. Among the things that keep me awake at night, this is not one of them.
Shri Vijay Mahajan, Director, Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Contemporary Studies. मैं उन्हें दावत देता हूँ कि वो शुक्रिया अदा करें.
Thank you very much, Professor Sen.
Thank you.
What's been a wonderful dialogue with lots of argumentation. It was mostly one-sided. But, and I want to thank Siddharth as well as Apurva for organizing this, and Kavita. I hope that we've been worthy of the first Neelam Memorial Public event. Thank you all of you. This is the biggest attendance we've had in this Jawahar Bhavan, and that makes its own point. I hope before you leave, you will leave behind your email or your mobile number so that we can invite you for many more such events. Thank you very much.
नेशनल दस्तक को देखने वालों से अपील है कि वह नेशनल दस्तक के सपोर्टर फॉर्म को भरें ताकि हम सीधे आपसे जुड़ सकें। नेशनल दस्तक की आपसे गुजारिश है कि अगर इसको बचाना चाहते हैं तो नेशनल दस्तक को सब्सक्राइब करने के लिए रेड कलर के सब्सक्राइब बटन को दबाएं, फिर बेल आइकन की घंटी दबाएं। नेशनल दस्तक को बचाने के लिए बहुत जरूरी है कि हर खबर को शेयर करें, लाइक करें, कमेंट जरूर करें।